and welcome to this edition of AI Insight, where we talk about what is happening in the enterprise AI space and all the fun discussions and topics around it. With me today, I have two amazing guests. Andy Palan, who's the general partner at the Marigold Group, and which focuses on technology and AI consulting services, and Brian Singer, who's the founder of the Singer Concept, which is another tech advisory firm. And they'll talk a little bit about themselves. But Andy and Brian, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy, Brian, I know both of you have been kind of CIOs and CTOs of large companies and small companies in the past. Maybe Andy, want to share a little bit about the Marigold Group and kind of your background?
Oh, sure. A pleasure to be here. I'm founded the Marigold Group about 9 months ago, focused on assisting companies getting from one stage of growth to the next, really focused on kind of AI and platform and that kind of intersection, which I find intellectually interesting and challenging. I am a serial CIO, CTO, taken a couple companies public. I was the CTO of CVS Health for a number of years, and really just pleased to be here. This is a fascinating topic with lots of opinions.
Absolutely.
And I'll try to keep mine closely as grounded as I can to observations and ideally even facts.
Absolutely. Brian?
That might be challenging there,
It
Andy.
might
Also happy to be here. I founded my business, the Singer Concept, in 2016, basically just helping companies progress through digital transformation, namely through enhancements and innovations in captive software engineering. Various CTO, CIO roles, most recently in the language services provider businesses, which is all about document translation and real-time on-demand remote interpretation, particularly in the healthcare space for limited English proficiency patients needing assistance, but also have had a significant background in population health management and having worked and led technology for pharmacy benefit managers, both of which are very critical in the Medicare, Medicaid space, which is obviously the biggest challenges that the United States sees nowadays across the population. So happy to be here. Lots of opinions on how we can best utilize this moving forward for efficiencies and advantages for the businesses coming up.
So let's start the discussion with you, Brad. So
Sure.
Healthcare and AI, right? In some ways, it's kind of everyone talks about it, but not a whole lot gets done. It sometimes feels like it. So where is in the evolution of progress and in the healthcare space, where is AI, and kind of how far have we progressed, or how little have we progressed? Like, and what are the use cases?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Healthcare technology adoption is probably the slowest moving vertical, despite having the most disruptors in it, right? It doesn't seem like a day goes by without there being a new startup leveraging technology for the betterment of managing one's health. At the same time, you're met with resistance because of the payers. At the end of the day, the payers get paid, the pharmaceuticals lead, the majority of the money business. And then there's sensitivity around protection of the provider, with numerous malpractice cases happening on a daily basis. Yet, when you look at artificial intelligence, the aspect of it, where I see it, is it's all about efficiencies. It's about eliminating waste.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, when you go into that and you have that medical engagement, whether it's your provider, you're in a hospital, emergency situation, most of that time is inefficient. It's actually not taking care of you.
Mm-hmm.
It's about asking you the same question multiple times to protect the interest of the person who's supposed to be looking after you. When we talk about machine translation, we talk about artificial intelligence, red flags and sirens wave off in the industry of folks on the business side, because they're very worried about the possibility of a machine providing information to a patient that could be inaccurate.
Mm.
And in that space, we have to figure out the best way to leverage these models where they're not in the critical path of providing care or making recommendations. because that's in the situation where the technology is putting themselves at the critical path and a decision maker or an advisor when they're not capable of doing those things. So I look at it as an efficiency play on the back end where we should be leveraging the historical information to, submit top 10 lists of next best actions based off of historical data. We should be looking at it on the software side for how do we more quickly turn around the time from request to the time to deliver, thus, being in a position where the software is enabling the better provision of care as opposed to disabling it. But again, one area we could go down, and that's up to you guys if you want to, is just the business buy-in, right? How do we, smooth that process over? How do we help educate businesses on the fact that this is an advantage for them? They should be adopting this as opposed to something they should be fearing.
Absolutely. We'll come to that. Andy, where are we on AI in healthcare, and where are the big use cases in your opinion?
Yeah, I think Brian said it well. It's any CIO, CTO out there in healthcare that does not believe that AI is the most significant technological advancement in recent history. Anyone that does not get that doesn't get it. It's just following the curve, and the people that deny it or don't want to acknowledge it. But this is literally science and data at the speed of silicon and light. And so from an engineering perspective, forget about like the use cases and things like that. There is a clear path to being able to process, model, predict in ways that just have not at all been possible before. So I hear from different CIOs, I'm a little bit more gentle, and certainly will not mention any names, but people who use the do no harm as far as being involved, having AI make the wrong decision in a clinical setting. Of course, that is a significant issue and needs to be managed just like we manage biologics today and their production in life sciences. That has to be regulated and vetted, but that cannot be used as and into the peril of the company and the CIO, CTO who is heralding this. That would not be the use case that I would be focusing on. And I think Brian also said this quite well, that there are some very natural, logical plays right now that address real-time, real concerns. One of those is physician burnout. Another is areas that are just highly inefficient and that drive up the cost of healthcare. Both of those lend themselves quite well to machine learning models, RPA, AI, transcribing visits. Right. When you're in the doctor's office, so the doctor doesn't have to do that, or the radiologist looking at the imagery, dictating notes with a technology working in the background, looking at secondary, tertiary, and levels of additional background detail. It's here, it's now.
Yes.
It's just a matter of getting some traction and identifying some use cases. But this is beyond pilot, in my opinion, and it's just a matter of figuring out where are the pain points and prepare to invest and learn and move quickly. And those that do will find, particularly in the back office, if you will, or in client and patient satisfaction, right, physician, clinician satisfaction, it will make a significant impact. And those that are leaning into it and not dipping their toe in the water, but understanding it's here, it's significant, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to tune it to their needs, will win.
So it seems like there are two themes that are coming out from your conversation. One is don't go after the clinical use cases from the beginning for all the right reasons, like from a risk perspective and others. But there's a lot of like efficiency and waste, like, and the themes I heard was obviously in the back office side of it, but also how work gets done, like how as an aid to the physician, as an aid to the nurse, and so on. So it seems like that's kind of where you see is the highest value set of use cases are there. Right.
Brian, go ahead, man.
I mean, so yes, I think if you look at studies, so while I was with Optum, we knew that roughly 62% of all costs were associated to administrative costs, not actually care, right? So when you think about that number, it's scary. That means that you as the patient, as you as the member, you're paying for not getting cared for. And then as I transitioned and I worked as the chief technology officer for a population health software offering, the value-based care model makes a lot of sense. But the value-based care model is so particular about the data and the integrity of the data to make sure that as a provider for someone who's on a Medicare Advantage plan, you are doing everything that you are supposed to be doing when that person's in the office. You look at it and you go, why on earth would you not want AI to be telling you that, right? Because that model, for one, providers and payers that do well with Medicare plans, they are on the STAR system. And if you have 5 stars, guess what you get? You get reimbursed, so you're making money, and you have open enrollment all year round. So those companies, those providers, those payers on that edge, with the amount of population, as the baby boomer generation is continuing to grow and become eligible for Medicare Advantage, that is ripe for this technology.
So,
and the scary thing, honestly, Amaresh, like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Chat GPT is open to everybody.
Yes.
Who's to say that people in the medical space are not already using this? Why not why not have it in your own labs where you're more of the control study, where you actually are investing your provider times, or your most well thought of provider times to make this accurate? So there's like a catch-22 going on. It's one, you should be using this because the value-based care model is coming, for everybody. But the other is, how are we're not regulating whether or not people are using this already, which is even scarier.
That's a great point. So that good transition. So makes sense. And you've been in CIO CTO roles, and I mean, so what's missing? Like, why is it not moving? If it's that obvious, why aren't we making more progress? Or put another way, if you're a CIO CTO, how should you be thinking about it right now? Andy?
Yeah. Well, I think that a significant reason why it isn't making the kind of progress is that it's not known enough about how to apply it and to what. I mean, it's along the lines of what we've just talked about. That to build this concept of the intelligent health system that benefits, increases patient experience, and it increases clinician productivity, drives down cost. It's a typical new technology with a lot of hype and not a great deal of understanding yet of where to apply it.
It's an education gap. You're saying there's an education gap.
I mean, that is my experience. Now, others may think differently about it. It's education and understanding the truly transformational force of this technology, unlike really anything I think that we've seen other than maybe the start of the internet.
Yeah, that's a really good evaluation there, Andy. I think trust, and I'll break this down into 2 different areas. Trust is probably the reason why we don't see higher adoption in a vertical where both Andy and I believe there should be higher adoption. And then I'll break it down and say it's because of the data. Now that's twofold, right? One is, we all know ChatGPT is built off of, historical data. The compute power needed for that to be continuously mining updated information is not quite there yet. Although there's some really interesting chip manufacturers that are doing some really crazy stuff that, in the next 12 months could change that. The other aspect of that is I do believe that the sensitivity around PHI data in particular leads technologists in the healthcare space to believe that they have to go build their own large language models, which is not the case. Those models are actually built, and the bigger opportunity is figuring out which of the models that are already available to use should be used, and then putting your customization, your stamp, your tuning on that. So it just comes down back up to, we don't trust it because it's not our data and the data is old, right? And of course, everybody's played around with GPT and seen some weird recommendation come up, which obviously always puts everybody in some kind of, there's the reason, right? And it's, obviously like 1% of the time that happens. And candidly, I was that person too, because I'd search for myself and it was like, well, I've been in the internet for all this time and it couldn't even find me. So I do think that's a big part of it. And we'll get into this too, but therein lies, like, going back, it's okay, now who does all of this stuff, right? Who's the person, or where does the funding come from to do this? And most recently, that's been my biggest challenge. It's that I want to do it, but from a business decision making process, how do I allocate resources to just go do R&D, which then are going to take my resources away from the things I know are quantifiable that I need to be doing? And so I've put myself in between that catch-22 quite often, and it's a real internal battle.
Yeah. And Andy, when you, let's say in your role, when you're at CBS or other places, how did you balance that? Because I do believe what Brian says, which is like, yes, I mean, I think there's an education gap. But there's more believers, but then how do you get started? How have you done with like other innovation activities in the past?
Well, one way you don't do it is being, kind of pushed into it from, by vendors, that that's not going to work. It's, I think you need a couple things. I think you need good leadership at these companies that understand the transformational force of this. There isn't any way around that fact. If you don't have that, then you'll be dealing with corner cases, pilots that an IT shop wants to do, or a business operations shop wants to do. It's finding some like-minded people to work together within companies, and that's literally how in my experience, how any great thing at scale works. It's a coalition of the willing, which requires leadership and some courage to take on opportunities that are not part of the annual budgeting process.
Right.
And that to me is about as straightforward as I can be about it. And it's interesting that, there are archetypes, there are models, there are patterns. This is very similar to, so what's the role of the CIO and CTO in this? What's the role of the CIO and CTO? Almost always, because of the functional nature of the role, she or he is in a unique position to build a coalition of the willing and to identify some business cases. And I think that's, unless you have someone at the very, very top that has the cash and the clout, which often is the case, but not always. I find it's a real opportunity for the CIO, CTO to lean in and find a business partner where they share an interest in advancing on behalf of the patient and the company to try to do something more innovative.
So let me ask you this other question, which I see all the time. Maybe Brian, starting with you, which is this is fundamentally a a technology that is very well suited for democratization within an enterprise, right? I mean, you said, I mean, people are already using it. How do you know,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that is, does that make CIOs, CTOs kind of afraid of it in some ways? Or I mean, given you guys were in that role, I mean,
I
it's like, yeah, people are selling. I mean, we sell directly to businesses too. I mean, we sell to CIOs, CTOs, but we sell to businesses too. So
it depends.
how do you
So
react to that?
yeah. So are you asking my ego if it'll be bruised, or so I'll give you an actual use case of this, which I'm happy about. One, just a real quick on Andy's right. If you have a CEO who's willing to do this, it's a win-win. And luckily, in my last, my most recent current role as a CTO, my CEO has been all up on this since it got released and wanting to figure out ways in which we could leverage it. And then at the same time, I've got great business partners who haven't like been dependent to say, hey, Singer, we need you to prioritize this stuff and get it to be perfect. Rather, they've already been using a couple of different off-the-shelf software packages. I'm not going to name them, but as part of their business development process and continuous learning process to evaluate how salespeople and their business development executives are handling calls with customers, and they're literally ingesting that into an AI engine so that it can score the conversation, score the salesperson, score the BDE, and make recommendations and understand whether or not that the client, the candidate was interested or the sentiment was poor. So, and I applaud them for that because it's a great way to do it, and it doesn't need my team to go and do that. However, there's nothing to say that my team, and I hope they are actually, because I've done this myself, are they spitting in the requirements for their code into ChatGPT and then just taking that code out? I hope they are. Have you guys done that? I mean, it's it's amazing. And for someone who literally, I'm OCD, for someone who had their specific standard of coding and structures and the way it was laid out, I love ChatGPT. It's just so clean.
Great use case.
Commenting everything. I hope they're spitting it in. I hope they're code reviewing their stuff before they submit it for a peer review. So there is aspects where I want them to do it. And then on the flip is I have to be cautious, because if they're putting a decision that is executed through an open API, then I have to be more suspect. Now I've done well in inserting my security team, and there's a security review, and we run Sneak for any vulnerabilities after, before and after every code release. So we're protecting ourselves from that. But yeah, it's a bit of the, push pull, right? Like I want them to be doing this, and that you got to be careful what ends up getting released in production.
Totally. I mean, and there's a way, I think that makes actually a good case for more of an enterprise flavor of AI. That's a great use case where models that already exist that can be used and applied for the purposes of an enterprise. It's kind of the advancing of generative AI or whatever other type of knowledge-based AI, whatever the model and the need is, to have it focused on the business for business needs is, I think, one of the very interesting things that we're starting to see. And Amaresh, with you and your endeavors, for that exact reason that Brian mentioned, that's why we're going to start to see these different enterprise models, much like we see in enterprise data platforms and enterprise API management platforms. I mean, there's a need for companies to manage their ecosystem of data and endpoints. So too, it will be for the knowledge and insights that a company spends time developing as an asset that ideally would be a competitive advantage in time.
Absolutely. So just changing gears towards talent, right? Maybe Andy.
Yeah.
If you were kind of just starting out as a early career technology professional, what would the advice be, and or for that, like knowing what you know now, right now, and given everything going on?
Oh my gosh. Um, being an electrician, I love working with my hand. No, it wouldn't be that. It could be that. I am envious of having those kinds of skills. Um, this is such an interesting time as a computer scientist. I have a background in electrical engineering and computer science, and I mean, these are things that we were only much of which we weren't even dreaming of, or it was just, science fiction. Certainly the power of compute and Moore's law, and all of just all of the advances that were happening in networking. You could see all of this coming, but it is really a fascinating time for understanding kind of math and science and the intersection of learning languages and data, and how to understanding the system. It's actually a really great time to be a systems engineer who understands how multiple sources of information, multiple types of compute, whatever the next generation of GPU will be in quantum computing and things of this nature, to understand how these systems work and work together. I think, and an understanding of how the different forms of large language models, generative language models, deeper neural networks, understanding how those work together programmatically. There's no more fascinating time to be starting a career than to in this focused area of the intersection of computer science, data, and advanced kind of chip and learning based intelligence. So
that's great.
That's where I would start. And I think you probably, people, engineers that are coming up, through the ranks, there's plenty of room to maneuver into these different fields, just because they all do come together. You need network, you need data, you have to understand schemas, you have to understand all DevOps, things like that. It's super neat time, don't you think, Brian? Like, I mean,
100%. You said it right there, DevOps. Like the advent of DevOps and cloud computing really is what tore down the wall between the traditional operations function versus the technological advancement in software engineering. They're not isolated anymore. It's all one and the same. It's just now all part of the SDLC. And when you see new programming languages being developed that are bringing modularity to Python, right, making it easier for non-Python engineers to start leveraging Python for the advancement of data engineering. And you're seeing the likes of prompt engineering becoming a new job that is paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. You look at it and you go, the traditional engineer, like software engineer, does that exist in 10 years? Is computer science a degree but in a completely foreign field than what it was for when I was there? And I'm like you, Andy. Like, I look at this and I remember one of my computer engineering classes, I had to build the CPU. Could you imagine? And that was complicated then. Can you imagine building the GPU? I mean, I'm like, holy crap, what these chips can do. It's just mind-boggling. And so, yeah, I'm with you, man. Like, I look at systems security and data. If that's what I was giving my advice to, it'd be go be a chip builder, be that genius to be the advancer on that. And if you weren't going to be the builder of the physical components, then by all means understand the security around it and how best to leverage data. And the data play gets more into the software engineering because I had the honor to work with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange 20 years ago on an in-memory data warehouse, and this was all C++ pointers, like not anything that we're, that we have available with turnkey operations via AWS or Azure these days. And that was awesome. But now looking at what you could do from a data engineer perspective, leveraging the GPU and all the different data models that exist, data's going to be the play, right? And when you come to how do you assist in advancing AI, marketing it, educating it, getting people to believe in its confidence, it all falls around the data integrity and the data quality and how data freely flows between disparate and integrated systems. So yeah, I look at it, if you love data, this is the opportune moment to go play and have fun.
Totally. And I might add to that, Brian, like, it is all about the data, and there is, particularly bringing it back around to healthcare, there will always need to be, always meaning for a long period of time, a need to have the logic of the physician in the loop.
Oh, for sure.
As we get, so there's also an interest, this is back to education and talent, there's also an interesting play for people who are just curious about how biologists who can understand the inputs to the disease states and how beginning to model how that might look and perform more of the next version of what we used to call the kind of the rule driven expert system.
Right.
I have a feeling it's going to be, at least for healthcare, some combination of at some point the complexity, the skills required to understand the biology behind the human body, combined with the advanced learning that is done through data. There's some intersection there, and those are different skill sets. There's statistics, there's chemistry, there's psychology, psychiatry, all of which I think will be required to move us closer toward these systems being able to emulate human decision making without it for a very, very long time, if ever, being able to do what we do as human beings.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is, I agree. I mean, there's no better time like right now to be, I mean, it's like, I mean, even at this stage of my career, it's like I'm just fortunate to be around. And
totally.
some of these things are
Yes.
happening, and I can just imagine if I had 25 more years, I know even more fun.
Totally.
So, listen, I mean, Brian and Andy, we could probably continue this conversation, and we probably can touch like 15 other facts we never got to. But I really had a lot of fun just kind of talking about where the healthcare industry is overall. But more importantly, from the CIO CTO perspective, like you guys have been on all sides of the product or you deal with and what it is like. So, but thank you so much for coming over and kind of sharing your insight. And we'll continue the conversation in other forums. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amaresh.
Thank you, Amaresh. Thanks, Andy.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Great seeing you, man.
OXO AI. What if? What's next?